Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this month's webinar on CPI grants management. This webinar is a part of a monthly series and we hope that it will sort of allow you all opportunities to get to know a little bit more about how we can all help yourself in doing the CPI work. We found that these virtual learning opportunities are great in sort of sharing information and allowing you all to sort of pick our brains on how you all can best do your work. Before we move deep into the webinar, what I wanted to do is just provide you with an opportunity to introduce ourselves. This is the CPI team. You have Ed Smith-Lewis, the director, Darrell Ann Watkins, senior program manager, and Cedra McGlone, program coordinator, and myself, Samad West Keys, our workforce strategist. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce one of our newest team members, Dr. LaToya Owens, who will be joining us as the Senior Learning and Evaluations Manager. Many of you are familiar with LaToya and the work that she's done to streamline the CPI evaluation process, and we're really excited to have her as a member of the CPI team. So please join me in welcoming LaToya Owens. Before we begin this webinar, I just wanted to provide everyone with an overview of what we'll be addressing today. We'll give you some ideas on CPI logistics, talk to you a little bit about the research and evaluation portions of CPI, discuss our institutional engagement strategy and timelines, as well as discuss the budget and reallocation request, and we'll end with a grant, just giving you an overview of the grant requirement and expectations, and then we'll allow some room for question and answering. However, before we move forward, I really wanted to take this time to ask my colleague, Ed Smith-Lewis, to just provide you all some context into why this webinar is important. Ed?
Good afternoon, everyone. Morning for some of you, I suspect. We're really excited to have this opportunity to speak to you about the subject at hand, partially because, as Samad said, we want to be the best partners we can be to you as you execute the work over the next 5+ years. And ultimately, our goal is to minimize our impact on your efforts while maintaining the necessary touch points such that we can properly evaluate the work, properly assist you with your work as you move forward in your execution. Throughout the process, and we've been now working with many of you for well over 1.5 years, almost 2 years we're verging on. And there are some times where we've had some hiccups, where we've had some lack of responsiveness, where maybe there were questions that went unanswered, or documents that went unshared, or responses to requests that were not necessarily sufficient for us on our end. And there's been some back and forth there. And so we decided to do a grants management webinar, just one, so we can make sure our expectations are clear, and then two, that we're holding you accountable to things that are required within the grant, and that you're holding us accountable to the expectations that we set as well. And so today's webinar is really about setting those expectations, being clear on what we're asking for, why we're asking for it, and what the expectation is in terms of the fidelity to that process, and how do we ensure institutions are being effective both on the ground as well as through the work. So today's webinar is our opportunity to really take a step back and understand best how we can all work together collectively. Again, our ultimate goal is your success, but to do that, we need to fundamentally be engaged with you at the campus level, and understanding that we can't get there, how do we do that virtually? And so a lot of today's conversation is how do we maintain a connection with you on the ground while you, fortunately you, do the work. So very excited to be here today. Please make sure by the end of the webinar that you ask any questions that you have. If there are any questions that you come up with at the end of this and it's over and you think about something later tonight, do reach out to us. Again, the goal here is partnership with you and clarity of expectations. And we can only get there if you're asking those questions. So very excited, again, to have you here. The team, I think, have divvied this up in a way that you're going to hear from everyone today. I believe, and that's also indicative of how we're taking the work forward. Everyone's involved on our side, and so we're all here as a resource to you. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Isidro McGlone, who's going to talk about the logistics, the things that I don't do well myself, but we're all working on it. Isidro.
Good afternoon once again. This is Isidro McGlone, and I am coming to you with a couple of logistical things that I'd like to discuss. The first thing I would like to discuss is I need the following contact person's information, which will be a name, their official title, their email address, and telephone number. And that is the IT person for your institution, the IR person for your institution, the lead provost on the CPI work, as well as all the CPI team members that are involved. I would like to have this information sent to my email, which is isidra.mcglone@uncf.org, possibly by the primary contact, no later than Wednesday of next week.
And we'll send the communication out as a follow-up to this, but this is information that we're learning that we need, and some institutions have provided it, others haven't. We want to take one more round at getting this information to us.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about ways to better assist us in supporting you. One of those ways is to respond to any correspondences that need a quick response within 24 to 48 hours of receipt. There are times when we need a quick turnaround on information needed for the CPI institutions, and I will send out an email, and sometimes it comes back a week later, which is a little late for the deadline. I really don't like to hound people for information, so it would be greatly appreciated if the primary contact could please respond within 24 to 48 hours of a request. Another thing is updating the CPI team changes. Since the planning phase, we've noticed a large turnover in the primary contacts as well as stakeholders for the CPI work. And one thing that some of the institutions have done to solve for this problem is to create an email alias where not only the information goes to the primary contact, but it goes to everyone else that is listed underneath that alias. But with that being said, I still need any updated changes to any CPI-related team members or stakeholders. And this also helps out with my next point. Please, please, please disseminate appropriate correspondences to the CPI team and other stakeholders in a timely fashion. When I send out correspondences, they are normally sent out to the primary contact on the record. And it is their responsibility to disseminate any information to the proper persons or to the whole CPI team so that everyone on the CPI team may be up to date and on all the current information. My last point is to please only submit what is requested. If I request a paragraph or a specific item from your institution's primary contact, please don't send me a 2-page document or anything that I am not requesting. It would be very beneficial to just send what I am requesting, and it will help things run a lot smoother. And that is all I have on ways to better assist, that you could better assist us in supporting you.
So this is Samad, and one of the things that I want to add to this is that Asidra kind of gave you all some checklist, a checklist of what are some of the things that we can do to, or you can do to help us help you. However, most of this is really from what we've experienced thus far with you. And so to Asidra's point, time is of the essence. And so it's really critical that when we send out communications to you, that we receive a timely response, and understanding that you all have a lot of things to do, as do we. And so we really need to make sure that when we do send you something, that you respond back in a timely manner, or just respond, period. And really, when you think about it, this is really the purpose of having that person who is 0.5 FTE, is so that when we do send out communications to you, that we can actually get a response back within an appropriate time frame. So just like I said, Asidra kind of went down the list, but this is all based on what we've experienced with working with the 24 institutions thus far. And it's on a continuum. Some are better than others. However, we want to make sure that all are to the right of the bell curve.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is LaToya Owens again. So the purpose of this portion of the webinar is to go more into depth regarding the evaluation and assessment. I know many of you have had questions about how we will be assessing your progress and using data, and we want to ensure you know how to effectively use the tools we've created to both assess your progress and to troubleshoot any issues. As you know, we'll have an annual report in the fall and an interim report due in the spring. In both of these reports, we'll collect the progress report, which you have the template for, and we went over on the evaluation webinar, and we'll go over in more depth. We also discussed your benchmarking data. In the fall, of course, you know, we will be collecting IPEDS data, and you've received the parameters around the IPEDS data to be collected for this fall already. If you have not received that, please communicate with me about that, but we sent it to each point of contact to disseminate amongst their teams on campus so that you know what to expect in terms of data collection. Of course, we know this year that will be due in October, on October 16th. With both the annual and interim report, you'll also be turning in a budget report with actual variances and new requests. And one reason the budget report is important here is because on the rubric that you use to assess yourself on the progress report, there is an entire section related to budgeting and your spending around the project. So to begin, your progress report template, which will be completed again twice a year, should enlighten your CPI contact or the CPI team on both your progress and your challenges. And we understand that often challenges lead to progress. For example, when we look at the progress report holistically, over the course of numerous years, we may see that you saw a challenge, reevaluated your plan, and then saw continuous progress in that specific area, leading to an achievement of the goal. And this may have been with the help of UNCF in the form of technical assistance or an acceleration grant that may come in the second or third year. But what we want to see when we look at the data holistically is what happened throughout the process of the work, what worked for you, because when we go back and do this work again, we want to make sure we institute those same factors, or we want to mitigate some of the challenges that our institutions have. And so let's look at what is in each section. We want to make sure that all of our discussion of activities are aligned with the three-pronged approach. So begin by identifying the approach to the goal that you will be expounding on that is aligned to. So next you need to do some analysis of your work and make decisions about how to proceed, which is where you will list any challenges to the overall implementation. We understand that this is an iterative process. We want to understand any changes, and this report will help us understand why those changes were necessary. The last field will help us understand the effects of those changes. And so you're going to move from telling us what your planned goal is and what the three-pronged approach, which prong of the approach you're using with that goal or you're aligned to with that goal. Next, you want to list your objective, which is the plan. Under activities, you tell us everything you're doing to make that plan work. What are you implementing exactly? We need to know and understand the work that is happening on the campus. In the interim assessment of objectives met, that's where you'll go over and review make your assessment or your evaluation of yourself and use the rubric to give yourself a score and explain any challenges or impediments that are aligned to that score. And this, again, is for us to understand how to mitigate any challenges that you're having in the work and to support you. And then strategy is we can't just drop off with, okay, these are our challenges. What are you going to do to address these challenges? What changes are you making in those goals, objectives, and strategies? Understanding that if you've made changes in goals, objectives, and strategies, that's a change to the implementation plan that you've given CPI. So we need to have that documented. We need to have changes of that initial work that we agreed on documented. It's not a problem that you've changed it. We actually encourage people to address and change anything that needs to, but we just have to have that documented and understand for ourselves what's happening. And then later we want to know the effects of these strategies or interventions to address the issues. If you needed to reorganize something, if you needed to put money somewhere else, well, how did that turn out? Did that work better for you? We need to know whether putting money in that pot or having it organized that way in the first place would mitigate any of those challenges in the future. And so now I want to go through an example so you understand the type of information to be included in each field. On this example, I'll be talking about a goal aligned with the intentional guided pathways prong. So that's one of the 3 prongs. Actually, we give you 4 that you can choose from in that drop-down box on the Excel sheet you were given. But that's the one we'll be using, the person or the campus used in this example. So the goal is to increase retention, as retention has been identified as an indicator of progress along the pathway. And so this is one goal this institution took. The goal does not need to be more than 1 sentence. You simply need to list what you are trying to achieve in this box. Under objectives, the campus has identified improving the advising function and streamlining the program of study as a way to accomplish the goal. And this is how they want to positively affect retention. So this is their plan. The campus then lists several activities aligned with each objective, giving further clarity of what is going to happen in the grant. So this tells us what is happening on each campus. These activities should be the result of internal and or external research on each topic area. For example, again, they said that they wanted to affect intentional guided pathways. They understood through research on their own campus or outside research that retention affects that. They might be using a best practice model. Whatever they've used to give them some knowledge about what they need to do on their campus is reflected in the goal and the objectives. And then the activities that they're executing come from that as well. So here the campus has rated themselves a 7 of 16 in terms of their current progress on this specific goal. And this is the section where they note that there hasn't been any movement on one of the objectives, and there's been a change of another objective, which likely led to their rubric score of 7 of 16. So each goal will be scored out of 16 with a 4 as the top score in each category, and we understand that there are 4 categories if you refer back to your rubric. But we will review the assessment rubric in more detail on a later slide. We will look at your average score per prong approach as we track or review your reports along a continuum. So as we go throughout the years, we hope to see an increase in the rubric score that you're giving yourself and how we're assessing you, right? So we don't, of course, expect anyone to have perfect scores off the bat, and we know that you'll be improving and making changes and might not be where you want initially, but we just hope to see improvement of the scores, which is why, again, it's called a progress report. We're not looking for people to receive A's immediately. We want people to work towards that A. The campus then explains the next steps plan to address current impediments. So again, it's not just okay to say we haven't seen any movement here. They explain why, and they list how CPI or other organizations who CPI can put them in contact with can support work that they have planned. In this case, they want to connect to a best practice or successful model of similar work, and they think that will help them improve or revamp what they're trying to do. Lastly, the assessment rubric highlights what we are observing and consider progress. Ultimately, an institution that displays all of these elements is implementing the CPI initiative most efficiently. In terms of organization and approach to the work, an institution should be using data research to make decisions, including identifying goals, objectives, and activities. Then investing in the appropriate structures to complete the project. We also want to see that you input some elements to ensure accountability. And that accountability is for yourself and among your team, if we're talking to the point of contact. Lastly, there has to be some evidence of innovation. This doesn't need to be technology necessarily, just a different way of thinking about how to do the work. We don't want people doing the same thing that doesn't work. In terms of implementation plan execution, you need to ensure operations are anchored in the three-pronged approach. Your actions should be aligned with our theory behind the change that should happen, which is why when you're filling out your progress report, we want everything in a linear fashion to connect back to the three-pronged approach. So when you're filling it out, if you see that your objectives or your activities start to get off or away from the approach, that's something for you to reevaluate along with your team. So also often, we know the work that is done can be done in pieces, but we want to ensure you are considering integration and working across teams. And lastly in this area, campuses need to be showing efforts to consistently evaluate and use that to improve their efforts. So again, when you evaluate yourself or you're doing these self-evaluations, you also need to think about self-improvement. What are you going to do differently to affect change in the area that you've noticed some deficits in? In terms of institutional engagement, we want to ensure that the entire campus is engaged in the work and that the communication is widely distributed and people have bought into the program at various levels. So often, again, we're communicating to the point of contact. What we want to ensure and what we want campuses to consider is if the communication is understood by everyone, meaning the point of contact has a responsibility to disseminate information to the appropriate parties, and you will be evaluating yourself on if that is happening appropriately. We know that it affects our ability to get work and other things that we need from the campus, as well as just the overall execution of the campus, of the implementation plan on the campus. And so we want to make sure that we give that real attention. And lastly, the budget needs to align the strategy and any changes to the execution. We want to ensure funds are being used optimally. And so all these things taken together will be what you need as you complete your initial progress report. Remember, this is only one part of the entire evaluation for this initiative. We want to review the report we wanted to review the report in detail, as the report, along with your IPEDS benchmarking data statistics and your budget report, will be due this fall. At all times, feel free to contact me with any elements that you do not understand or anything that you feel that you haven't received from us, and I would be happy to talk to you and your team, your data point person, to just ensure you understand everything that you need to turn in this October on the 16th, align with your annual report, and go over anything you might want to understand for the spring, as the only difference is the type of data statistics we're collecting. Remember, this fall we're collecting IPEDS data, and spring it will be NAEP survey data. And we'll have consistent communication coming up about what will be turned in again this fall, and then as we look forward to the spring. But please feel free to reach out to me. And again, this is LaToya Owens as you continue with this work.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Daryl Ann Watkins. The UNCF CPI team is looking forward to working closely with our partner institutions for overall success of the initiative. We have created the Institutional Engagement Strategy, also known as the IES, for 3 reasons. One, we want to ensure institutional engagement and buy-in. The second reason is to assist with capacity building. And finally, the third reason is simply for information sharing. I would like to briefly discuss each prong of engagement. Let's first start with information sharing. Some of you have already received a 30-minute check-in call attended by the primary point of contact with your program manager. This call is simply for us to understand what's going on at the institution. We want to hear about the highlights, what you're excited about, any challenges you may be facing, any opportunities for us to provide assistance when necessary, and to know your institution's next steps in the program. We are also providing virtual meetings, which are very similar to check-in calls, but will extend for 2 hours and may include the institutional leadership team. The second prong is capacity building. As you may be aware, the CPI team is committed to providing webinars that will focus on sharing grant management information. We want to highlight exemplar cases from our partner institutions and provide virtual technical assistance. We are also working on providing each institution with on-site technical assistance in an identified area of need. And the final prong is engagement and buy-in. We want to ensure that our partner institutions are not only engaged in the work, but also have proficient knowledge and understanding of the work, that ultimately our desire is that you are able to lead the conversation on career pathways. And finally, in our 3-pronged approach is our institutional site visit. The CPI team intends to visit each institution for 1.5 days. This annual site visit will be our opportunity to do a deep dive at the partner institution. Our expectation is that we meet with each institutional stakeholder. Well, that includes everybody, the president, leadership team, provost, faculty, students, everybody. The purpose of this site visit is to ensure that there is institutional buy-in and that all stakeholders are aware of the CPI work at the institution and is communicating the same thing within the institution. We will also review the institutional self-assessment rubric that LaToya described earlier. We will discuss programmatic updates to include those highlights and those challenges. LaToya talked about the progress updates. We want to find out what are the roadblocks that you are experiencing. Are there bottlenecks? We want to see your timelines and goals and milestones and where you are in those areas. The discussion will also include the institutional budgets and next steps and any general thoughts and concerns the UNCF CPI team may have at that time. We are asking each institution to give 2 to 3 options for institutional site visits between October 16, 2017 and the end of March 2018. Please contact Isidro McGlone with those options. We will be sure to contact you when other engagements are due to be scheduled. In addition to our site visits and other engagement components, in addition, our site visits and other engagement components will help us identify exemplar cases within our cohort. As you can see, in October and December, 2 of our partner institutions will be highlighted for their work in the upcoming webinar series. Here is an annual view of our institutional engagement. Our intent is to engage with you a lot. I mean a whole lot. But we hope in very meaningful ways. We will have monthly webinars. As stated earlier, many of you have already scheduled your check-in calls. We also know that some of the institutions are already working on dates for their site visits. We also have our first progress report and data collection, which is due October 16th. Listen, our intent is not to overwhelm you or in any way stress you out, but to be strategically engaged with you and your institution for the success of the work. So why is this engagement important? It's basically to ensure that we understand what is going on at the institution. We want to know, what are your successes? What's happening at the institution that you are excited about and that you feel could become a promising or best practice? What opportunities are there for improvement? We understand that the implementation plans were plans and theories, and so there will be opportunities for us to work together to improve the plan. So then, how can we problem solve together? Instead of being siloed at the institutions, we would like to be a thought partner with our institutions to determine next steps. And finally, how can we best support you through technical assistance? We have a slew of consultants available to us to work with our institutions, but in order to engage them, we need to know how to best utilize their services. The bottom line for us is your success is our success, and we are looking forward to partnering with you to see that success. So we have a standard annual disbursement of grant funds. These disbursements are scheduled in December of every year for the grant period. As long as the institution is in compliance with its grant agreement, we will honor that budget disbursement. Of course, UNCF CPI will monitor spending, and if an institution does not spend 90% of its annual budget, the disbursement will be held until such expenditures have occurred. If you feel like your spending will be off track, you need to make changes at any particular time, we recommend that the institution consider applying for a budget modification. The key here is early communication with your program manager and the UNCF CPI team. That being said, we understand that plans will change. And because plans will change, your budget will change. And here is what you should do after carefully analyzing your budgetary needs and options. Let's put a stop right here for a second so that I can highlight it. Please analyze your budgetary needs and options before you try to modify your budget. Once you've done that analysis, we can go through the steps of budget modification. First, contact your program manager, either Samad or myself, requesting a budget modification form. This would be an appropriate time to discuss your needs with your program manager to determine if there may be other options available to the institution. After we request a budget modification form and we send the document to you, fill out the document, and return it to us along with a revised budget narrative. Please give us a detailed explanation and reasoning for the modification. And the final step is the CPI team will review your request and within 2 weeks respond with a decision for modification. We are not going to leave you out there to dry. If for some reason we deny the request, we will work with you to come up with an alternative solution or ask you to revise the request so that we can approve it. The modified budget will then become the new budget for the remainder of the grant period. Now I will turn it over to Samad, who will talk about some of the CPI grant requirements and expectations.
Thank you, Darrell Ann. What I would like to do with my time is just really sort of review some of the things that you all have, I guess you should know. There are the CPI grant requirements, and many of you should be familiar with these, as they were included in your grant agreement that your institution signed to participate in this initiative. The first piece that I want to really address is the most important thing, and that is that you all continue to execute the submitted and approved implementation plan proposal. It seems like a no-brainer. However, it's important that you all continue to make progress on the plans that you put forward in addressing the 3 areas of the CPI 3-pronged approach of intentional guided pathways, curricular enhancement, and integrated co-curricular engagement. I would like to reiterate what my colleague LaToya touched on, is that your implementation plans are a living document, and so we expect and welcome changes along the way. The idea is that you are learning what works and what doesn't work. And so with that being said, you'll continue to make adjustments as you start to acquire new information. So many of you have reached out to us out of concern that your implementation plans have been shifting. But we welcome that. But we also need you to document that, why you decide to make those sorts of changes, but continue to do the work. And so I liken it to a federal grant, right? Federal grants, they are what they are. You cannot change anything whatsoever. But in this case, you have a living and breathing document in front of you, and that's your implementation plan. So after the CPI convening this summer, many of you should have gone back to your campuses and said, okay, well, now that we have this design thinking idea or this design thinking mindset, how can we implement that, or we can put that into our implementation plan? And then come back to us and say, hey, we took away what we learned from this convening, and we wanted to incorporate that into our implementation plan, and just resubmit that to us. We want to know what's going on. We want to know how you're changing things. So don't think of this as a stagnant document, but more along the lines of this is a living and breathing document. Another thing to keep in mind is that each institution is required to submit both an interim and annual report. The interim reports are due in March, the next one being March 2018, and the annual reports are due in September of each year, with the exception of this year, where we're asking you all to submit your reports by no later than October 16th. If you have any questions, I'm going to echo my colleague LaToya again, please do not hesitate to reach out to her with your questions or concerns around the reports. And I think the sooner the better. The third thing I want to hit on is that all institutions are expected to participate in the data collection activities. LaToya mentioned earlier that we will collect data twice annually, IPES data in the fall and the NACE data in the spring. All data collection requests should be handled by your IR or data point person, and we look for the CPI point of contact and the IR data point person to sort of work together to make sure that, one, the reports or the progress report aligns with the data that's being submitted. The fourth piece is that we are asking, or it's required of you to all have identified a primary point of contact. It is now the middle of September, and so we would expect that this person would have been identified and hired or brought on at this particular point, However, if it's still the case that you don't have this person appointed or designated, please reach out to your program officer, program manager, Darrell Ann, or myself, so we can start to devise strategies on what you can do to get this filled. It's important that we have that person on board to sort of handle all the things that we're throwing at you so that you all aren't overwhelmed. Now, one of the things that we've noticed and we want to sort of, I guess, recommend to you all is that this person who you all call or designate to be the point of contact should be able to understand the ins and outs of the institutional program. The person should have some autonomy to execute and implement as needed. And we have mentioned in a number of cases, or we've experienced a number of cases, where a person may not have the autonomy to make decisions, and so it's become very challenging to move the work forward because there's sort of a wall or a hiccup because this particular person who's the point of contact or the point person for CPI can't really execute this work. And so we really would recommend that if the person doesn't have decision-making power, that they at least they have a direct line to the program champion. In this case, it's usually the provost or a VP of some sort. But what we really want to stress here is that this person may not have full decision-making power. However, they should be able to directly talk to the person who does, in an effort to make sure that things are continuously moving on your campus. Number 5, as mentioned earlier, during Latoya's segment, as a member of this cohort, you are required to participate in the NACE annual First Destination Survey and share your results with us during your different reports. And lastly, we expect continued participation in the CPI learning community. Now, somebody may say, okay, well, what is that? Well, what is participation in the CPI learning community? And this really means that you're being available for check-in calls, you're being responsive, you're attending webinars, you're talking with the CPI team, you're talking with your colleagues at other institutions. So you're really engaged in this work. And just to kind of give you all a heads up, we do track that information. And so it's really how we sort of ensure that you all are engaged. And in the case that we don't see you engaged, you probably will get a phone call from either Darrell Ann or myself, just to make sure that everything's okay. And as we move along with this, we're looking for ways to make this easier for you. And so we've identified a couple of options or solutions that we want to roll out within the next couple of months. So be on the lookout for more information around the CPI learning community and how we plan to sort of digitize this and make it less cumbersome for you in terms of submitting information and communicating with us and your colleagues at other institutions. But once again, our goal is to make sure that we make the sharing and disseminating of information seamless. The next piece that I really want to just highlight is the timeline, the major activities that will take place over the course of the next 5 years. The idea here is that learning will continue to happen along the way, and so we just want to make sure that you all are aware of some of the things that are taking place, i.e. the annual convening, which is to happen every summer. However, there may be other convenings at maybe some of your peer institutions that are worth attending, so just be mindful of that. Grant disbursement, the rolling out of our workforce engagement strategy, which is to include our faculty sabbatical opportunities, as well as our industry alignment fund, and the rolling out of our acceleration fund, all of which you'll hear more about as we continue to roll this work out. For the sake of, I guess, this presentation, we really want you to all just focus on the timeline, but you'll definitely get more information about these other opportunities, i.e. the workforce engagement strategy and the performance acceleration grant fund. So as you can see, there are many learning opportunities, and there's a lot of learning taking place to expand on what we mean by participating in the CPI learning community. And so what I see this here is a printout, right? And you all can use this to sort of just be a constant reminder of how to really engage within the CPI learning community. Once again, participating in annual convenings, and these convenings don't necessarily, well, the CPI convening is a non-negotiable. However, there are other convenings where it may be in your best interest to participate in because it can help you do your work better on your campus. The other things are completing your 2 reports, the interim and annual, completing at least 1 formal communication to share with institutional stakeholders. This needs to happen annually. And the other is publish at least 2 informational communications, informal communications, which will include things like updating your website, a tweet, a Facebook post, a blog, or other venues where you can sort of get the word out around CPI and what you're doing on your campus. We encourage you all to network regularly. Network regularly not only with the people on your campus who you probably may not engage with on a day-to-day around this work, but also network with the other individuals on other CPI campuses that are doing similar work, and that's the only way that we can really start to identify synergies and areas of overlap to figure out how we can actually go about addressing some of these issues in a 3-pronged approach. And so, I'll be the bearer of bad news. What you're going through on your campus or experiencing on your campus, it's probably something that somebody else is experiencing. And so the only way that we can really sort of make sure that we tackle these issues and make sure that we don't really recreate the wheel is to share. And so I encourage you to please reach out. If you need contact information from any of the institutions, we'll be glad to share it with you. Think of this as a learning community. The last is, and I'm going to just pause and say this really slow, and my colleagues hear me say this all the time. We need you, once again, we need you to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, the bad, the ugly. And I say that only because it's not in anyone's best interest for you all to share roses and unicorns. Because if there are problems or challenges, we need to know how to address those. And so giving us a rose-painted picture does not really allow us to really dive in deeper on what are the issues that you all are experiencing on your campuses, and it doesn't really allow us to provide you with the proper support that you need to actually execute this work. And so when we schedule these check-in calls, when we do our site visits, it's really, really, really important that you're open and honest with us. And I get it. It's difficult to do that, especially when somebody else holds the purse strings. However, we don't look at this as being punitive. We look at this as being more of an opportunity to really continue to learn and to right-change things as we see them coming. And my last slide that I really want to address is the idea around communications procedures. And so this is, in a nutshell, the steps to complete this. We ask that you develop the promotional materials and send it to the Career Pathways email address with the subject line reading, approval needed. We will respond within 48 hours letting you know that we received this and acknowledging that we received this document. And so just to provide you with a little context around our internal process, once we, the CPI team, receive it, we'll review it and provide feedback. We will then return the document noting suggested changes and recommendations. And once you, the institution, sends us back an updated document, we will forward this finalized document to the UNCF Branding and Marketing and Communications Office for final approval. Our goal is to make this process as seamless and efficient as possible, but if you're going to use the logo, please adhere to this process. FYI, everything does not require an approval, such as internal or external communications about the work, as long as it's not using names and or logos. However, we do ask that you curate these items, as we'll be asking you to submit them as a part of your annual report starting in fall of 2018. So these are things, once again, that you all probably have seen once before, but we want to make sure that you all are quite aware of them, and it's fresh in your minds as you all start to move forward in implementing this work on your campus. And so without anything else to say, I would like to now open up for questions and answers. Once again, if you do have a question, there should be a question tab located on the control panel. If you type your question there, we'll be sure to answer it as we receive them. So we have one question, and it's a compliment as well, I think. I love the idea of learning communities and periodic sharing with the other schools. Did I overlook a list of all the primary contacts and their contact information and their foci? This would be very helpful. Thank you for this question. So we will share this information with you. I think we can share the primary point of contact information. However, what we're going to work to do is make this a little bit more digestible so that it's not overwhelming. And that way we can also categorize what the foci is on each of the different campuses. But the short answer is yes, we can share that with you. No, you did not overlook it. So will the slides be shared with everyone? Yes, all CPI slides will be or all presentation slides will be shared with everyone via email. However, this can be viewed the slides will be sent via a link via email, but we'll also send you a link to this webinar where you can view it after today's date. For needs around technology, can you be a little more specific in the kind of additional support which you could leverage through CPI?
Okay, so when you list on your progress report or let CPI know on your progress report that you would like assistance in some area, we generally call that technical assistance. And what we're usually referring to is support in the form of consultants or anyone on CPI's team that has expertise in an area. We also mentioned being able to connect you via the learning communities we mentioned, or campus to campus with campuses that may offer some best practices in that area. We would have to look at specific requests as they come in terms of actual technology issues that campuses may have. We don't currently have any plans to provide specific assistance around that. So we call technical assistance mostly consultant, intellectual kind of support on the campuses.
And please be advised that if you do require some form of technology to collect data or analyze the data, and it has not been included in the budget, then that might be an area where you could consider budget remodification.
Another question that we have here, one second, I got out of sequence. Regarding the budget, mentioned 90% must be expended within the period. Does that mean money will be lost or just held?
No, it does not mean that money will be lost. It means that when the annual disbursement is supposed to be delivered in December, if you have not spent 90% of the budget, we will hold the disbursement until 90% has been spent.
And I just want to add some clarity there. The reason why is we've been in numerous conversations already regarding underspending on accounts. And it's okay if work shifts and things don't get done as quickly as we would like. However, we don't want to disperse too much money too quickly because we have to keep, our number one goal is good stewardship, but we also want to make sure that there's fidelity to the grant and what you said you would use the monies for. And so our advice to you is that if you are underspent, make sure that you are in clear communication with your primary point of contact here in our office, either Darrell Land or Samad, such that they know that and it's not a surprise. As Darrell Land said, you will not lose the funds. It will be held until funds have been spent down appropriately.
And let me just add one other thing to that. Sometimes you may have the money allocated to be spent, meaning that you've reached out to the vendor, you've already made decisions on delivery for whatever the products or services. However, the actual payment to the vendor may not happen until January timeframe. Please feel free to encumber those funds, but be sure to advise us of what you're doing. So there is a difference between not spent and just has not been spent as yet.
Another question is, what if we do not report by deadline? Will there be another deadline date?
There is one deadline date. That is the deadline. If you have concerns with meeting the deadline, please, again, be in close communication with your primary point of contact here in our office. We are not making exceptions for the deadline. That means you're out of compliance, and then it is your job to get back in compliance. Step one of that is to submit as soon as possible post the deadline. So there will never be a new deadline. The deadlines are set. They're deadlines for a reason. If there is continual missing of deadlines, there will be a conversation about continuing within the work. Ultimately, our deadlines matter for you because we have deadlines on our end. Everything sort of impacts the next thing. And so if you are very responsive, as the teacher said in the beginning, we can't be responsive towards you. And we're looking for responsive partners in this work. Back to that 0.5 FTE, we believe there's someone dedicated at least half time to CPI. Therefore, even though we're asking for quite a few things from you, we think there's ample time to get those things done by the deadline. And so I'm a little, I appreciate the question around the second deadline, but I want you guys to know that a deadline is set for a reason, and egregious missing of that deadline is grounds for discontinuing your participation in this work. That is not what we want. That is not our goal. We will work with you to mitigate that risk ultimately, but if you are sure that you are going to miss a deadline, the best thing to do, clear communication with your program manager, and we'll decide on a case-by-case basis. Egregious missing of the deadline will not be accepted.
All right. One is, the last two questions is, should we wait to submit our budget modifications if we're going to submit our annual report? So should we submit the annual report, or should we just submit the budget modification now?
You can submit the budget modification with the annual report. However, if you deem it necessary to submit it earlier, please feel free to do so. You do not need to wait until October 16th to submit that budget modification, or even send us a request for that budget modification. Please remember the steps for asking for a budget modification. You first reach out to us, and we send you the revised form.
All right, and the last is a point of clarification. Since the distribution periods were changed, we have 14 months in period 1, which includes the planning grant time and 6 months of implementation, correct? And then period 5, which is January 2020 to May 2022, is 16 months. Should we not be sort of prorating to carry over for those extra months?
Thank you for that question. When we originally discussed with the institutions the change in disbursement, we asked each institution to take into consideration those changes that you've just discussed and revise their budget to make the necessary changes. Right, to make the necessary changes to allow for those extra months in the year. So our expectation is that when the institution receives notice of the disbursement change, that they would have modified their grant amount or their work and what their expenditures would be at that time. While we looked at each institution, we noted that for most of the institutions, there was really not a negative impact with regards to the disbursement change. So I would answer the question by saying the budget that we have for each institution should have taken into consideration the extended months over the first year of the grant and the last year of the grant.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. That concludes our webinar. If you have any additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to any of my esteemed colleagues here with your specific questions. Please also note that at the end of this webinar, there will be a short survey, which we're always looking to improve what we're doing here and want to make sure that this information is actually useful to you. So please take a couple of minutes, probably two the most, to just complete this short survey. With that being said, thank you all. My apologies for going 5 minutes over. Please reclaim your time some other place throughout your day. And once again, thank you for participating in this webinar. Have a great day.